A week after I lost my job, I signed a $25 million contract and came home to tell my wife. But when I opened the door, I saw my wife kissing the same boss who fired me on our bed. My wife's parents said, I deserved it. Days later, my wife and her new lover mocked me at a party. But when they saw who stood next to me, her lover screamed, "Oh my God, you know what they say about life kicking you when you're down." Well, apparently life didn't get the memo that I was already sprawled out on the pavement eating dirt like it was my last meal. My name's Adrian Blake, and at the ripe old age of 34, I've officially mastered the art of having the universe laugh directly in my face. Picture this. Exactly 7 days ago, I was sitting in Charles Mercer's corner office at Harrison Tech, watching this smug bastard fire me like I was some intern who'd been caught stealing post-it notes. The guy had the audacity to lean back in his leather chair. The one that probably cost more than my monthly rant, and deliver his little speech about budget cuts and streamlining operations. Yeah, right. More like streamlining me right out the door because my logistics AI was making his outdated systems look like they belonged in a museum next to rotary phones and fax machines. Nothing personal, Adrian, he'd said, not even bothering to look up from his computer screen. Nothing personal. Dude had been gunning for me ever since I pitched the idea that could revolutionize their entire supply chain management. But hey, what did I know? I was just the guy who'd been busting my ass for 3 years, working weekends, skipping family dinners, practically living at that office like some kind of corporate hermit crab. So there I was, walking out of Harrison Tech with my sad little cardboard box of personal belongings. You know, the classic fired employee starter pack, a coffee mug, some pins that probably didn't work, and a plant that was already half dead from the fluorescent light torture chamber they called an office. Real dignified stuff. But here's where life decided to play its favorite game. Let's mess with Adrian's head until he doesn't know whether to laugh or cry. Because exactly 1 week after getting the boot, I'm standing in the marble-floored lobby of Meatfair Corporation shaking hands with Julian Cross himself. Yeah, that Julian Cross, the CEO who's basically the healthcare industry's golden boy, and signing a contract that made my bank account do a happy dance. $25 million. Let that sink in for a hot minute. $25 million freaking dollars for the same logistics AI that Charles had dismissed like yesterday's leftover pizza. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife and serve it at a dinner party. Harrison Tech, the company that had basically told me to take a long walk off a short pier, was now desperate to get their grubby little hands on my design. Not directly, of course, because that would require admitting they'd made a colossal mistake. Instead, they were trying to work through Meatfair, hoping to license my tech through a backdoor deal. Julian Cross, bless his capitalist heart, saw right through their Adrian, he'd said, adjusting his $5,000 suit like it was no big deal. What you've created isn't just innovative, it's revolutionary. We don't need Harrison Tech's permission to change the world. And just like that, I went from unemployed loser to multimillionaire overnight. The American dream, baby. Except nobody mentions that sometimes it feels more like a fever dream where you're not sure if you're winning or losing your mind. Walking home from that meeting, I had the contract tucked safely in my messenger bag like it was nuclear launch codes. My head was spinning with all the ways I was going to tell Melissa the news. My wife, God, even thinking about her made my chest tight with anticipation, was going to flip her lid in the best possible way. I could already picture her face lighting up, maybe doing that little squeal thing she used to do when we first started dating. Hell, maybe we'd finally be able to afford that house in Cherry Creek she'd been eyeing. The one with the fancy kitchen and the walk-in closets bigger than most people's bedrooms. I was rehearsing my big reveal speech, practicing how I'd casually drop the news like it was no big deal. Oh, by the way, honey, remember how I got fired last week? Well, funny story. I was even thinking about stopping to grab some champagne. Maybe those expensive strawberries she likes really make it a celebration to remember. But life, that magnificent bastard, had other plans. I pushed open our bedroom door, ready to share the best news of our marriage, and instead got a front row seat to the worst betrayal of my life. There was my wife, my supposedly loving, devoted wife, lip-locked with Charles freaking Mercer on our bed, the bed I'd been sleeping in for 3 years, the one with the stupid expensive sheets she'd insisted we needed from that boutique downtown. They froze like deer in headlights, but not in the way you'd expect. There was no scrambling, no panicked explanations, no desperate attempts to cover up. They just stopped like they'd been caught doing something mildly inconvenient. Not destroying my entire world. The contract folders slipped from my hands. Papers scattering across our hardwood floor like confetti at the world's worst party. Legal documents worth $25 million mixed with the dust bunnies under our dresser. And all I could do was stand there like an idiot trying to process what I was seeing. Melissa's eyes met mine. And here's the kicker. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look ashamed or sorry or even remotely embarrassed. She looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted her favorite TV show or walked in on her during an important phone call. Her perfectly styled blonde hair wasn't even messed up, which somehow made the whole thing even more insulting. Charles, that smug piece of garbage, actually had the balls to smirk at me. This guy, the same guy who fired me a week ago, who'd sat behind his big important desk and basically told me I was worthless, was now sprawled across my bed like he owned the place. "You should have seen this coming," he said, his voice dripping with that same condescending tone he'd used when he'd canned me. Like this was all part of some master plan I'd been too stupid to figure out. And you know what the really twisted part was? Standing there in my own bedroom, watching my wife and my former boss destroy my life in stereo. All I could think about was that contract on the floor. $25 million worth of vindication scattered like broken dreams across the carpet. The universe's timing was either perfect or perfectly cruel. I couldn't decide which. You ever have one of those days where you wake up thinking things can't possibly get worse and then life says, "Hold my beer and watch this"? Yeah. Well, welcome to my Tuesday morning, courtesy of the Green Family Circus. The call came at exactly 8:47 a.m. I know because I was staring at my phone like it might magically transport me to a different dimension where my wife wasn't banging my ex-boss. Harold Green's voice boomed through the speaker with all the warmth of a tax on it. "Adrian, you need to come to the house now. We need to discuss this situation." Situation. That's what we were calling it. Now, not adultery, not betrayal, not the complete implosion of my marriage, just a situation like a minor plumbing issue or a parking ticket. The Green family had always been masters at repackaging reality into something more palatable for their delicate sensibilities. So, there I was, driving my beat-up Honda Civic through the gates of their estate in Cherry Hills Village, feeling like I was entering enemy territory. And let me tell you, the Green Mansion was the kind of place that screamed, "We have more money than God, and we want everyone to know it." 8 bedrooms, 12 bathrooms, and enough marble to make a Roman emperor jealous. The driveway alone was longer than most people's entire street, lined with perfectly manicured hedges that probably cost more to maintain than my annual salary at Harrison Tech. I parked between Harold's Bentley and Patricia's Mercedes. My Honda looking like a rusty paperclip next to a couple of Rolex watches. Real subtle message there, folks. Might as well have put up a neon sign that said, "You don't belong here, peasant." The front door was one of those massive oak monstrosities that required both hands and a personal trainer to open properly. Before I could even knock, it swung open to reveal Maria, their housekeeper, who gave me a look that was equal parts pity. "And you poor bastard." She'd always been nice to me, probably because she recognized a fellow member of the People Who Work for a Living Club. "They're in the library," she whispered like she was directing me to a funeral, which, let's be honest, might not have been far off. The library, of course, because nothing says we're about to destroy your life like doing it surrounded by leather-bound books that nobody's actually read. Harold Green collected first editions the way some people collect baseball cards, except his hobby came with a lot more pretension and a lot less fun. I found them exactly where you'd expect. Harold nursing a tumbler of bourbon at 10 o'clock in the morning like some kind of Southern gentleman cosplayer and Patricia clicking her pearl necklace like worry beads. She was wearing one of those outfits that screamed, "I shop at stores that don't have price tags." All cream-colored fabrics and shoes that probably cost more than most people's rent. "Adrian," Harold said without getting up, gesturing to a chair across from them like I was applying for a job. "Sit, not please sit or have a seat. Just sit." Like I was a dog who'd learned a new trick. Real classy, "Harold, your country club etiquette lessons really paid off." I stayed standing, mostly because I knew it would annoy them, but also because sitting felt too much like surrendering. "Let me guess," I said, crossing my arms. "You call me here to explain why your daughter is screwing my boss in my bed. This should be good." Patricia's face twisted like she'd just bitten into a lemon wrapped in disappointment. "How dare you speak about Melissa that way? She's our daughter, and she deserves better than what you've given her." "Better than what I've given her." I laughed and it came out sharper than I intended. "You mean like love, respect, and 3 years of my life? Or are we talking about the $25 million contract I just signed? Because I'm pretty sure that counts as giving her something." Harold's bourbon glass paused halfway to his lips. "What contract?" "Oh, that was rich. They didn't even know about Meet Fear yet." Melissa hadn't bothered to mention that little detail during her family briefing. Probably too busy planning her next romantic rendezvous with Charles to fill in the parentals on my sudden career resurrection. "The one that makes me worth more than Charles Mercer's entire annual salary," I said, watching their faces like I was studying a master class in shock and confusion. Funny how timing works, isn't it? But Patricia, bless her cold, calculating heart, recovered faster than a politician during a scandal. She waved her manicured hand like she was swatting away an annoying fly. Money doesn't make you a man, Adrian. You were never good enough for Melissa. Charles is a real man, a provider. He has breeding class, a future breeding. She actually said breeding like we were talking about Rache horses instead of human beings. I'd always known Patricia was a snob, but hearing her talk about her son-in-law like I was some kind of genetic mistake really drove the point home. A provider? I shot back. The guy who fired me last week because he was threatened by my success. That's your idea of a provider? A man who steals other people's wives because he can't get his own life together? Harold slammed his glass down hard enough to make the bourbon slush. You watch your tone, boy. You're in our house, boy. I was 34 years old, had just signed a multi-million-dollar contract, and this fossil was calling me boy. The disrespect was so thick you could spread it on toast and serve it at their next charity luncheon. You're right, I said, my voice getting colder by the second. I am in your house. The house where you raised a daughter who thinks marriage vows are more like suggestions. The house where you taught her that loyalty is optional and integrity is for poor people. That's when I heard the clicking of heels on marble. And Melissa appeared in the doorway like she was making a grand entrance at a debutante ball. But she wasn't alone. Oh no, that would have been too simple. Charles was right behind her, his hand resting on the small of her back like he owned her. The sight of them together hit me like a punch to the gut all over again. Melissa was wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Something expensive and clingy that screamed, I'm celebrating my freedom from my loser husband. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, and she was smiling like she'd just won the lottery. Charles looked equally smug, dressed in one of those casual but expensive outfits that probably cost more than my car. His hand on Melissa's back wasn't just possessive. It was a declaration of war. A visual middle finger aimed directly at me. Adrian, Melissa said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I didn't expect to see you here. Yeah, well, your parents thought we should have a little chat about your recent career change. Her eyes narrowed and for a split second, I saw a flash of the real Melissa. The one who'd been planning this betrayal long before yesterday. My what? Your new job as Charles's side piece. Although, I guess it's more of a promotion now since you've graduated from wife to mistress to what exactly? Trophy girlfriend. The room went dead silent. Patricia gasped like I just committed murder in church. Harold's face turned a shade of red that probably wasn't medically advisable. But Charles just smiled wider. Congratulations, Adrian, he said, his voice smooth as snake oil. You finally figured it out. Only took you 3 years. And that's when I realized the truth that hurt worse than anything else. They'd all been in on it. Every single one of them. This wasn't some spontaneous affair or moment of weakness. This was a coordinated campaign to humiliate me. And I'd been too stupid to see it coming. I looked around that library at all those expensive books and antique furniture and family portraits of people who'd never worked a day in their lives. And I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to let them win. Not today, not ever. You know what, I said, heading for the door. You all deserve each other. That night, I packed a bag and left for a shabby rental on the edge of Denver. The place had peeling wallpaper and a kitchen that belonged in a horror movie, but it was mine. And as I stared at those cracked walls, I swore to myself, I would not let them win. You know what's funny about Rock Bottom? It's got great acoustics. Every single sound echoes back at you with crystal clear precision, including the voice in your head screaming, "What the hell are you going to do now, genius?" I've been wallowing in my crappy rental apartment for exactly 48 hours, surviving on a steady diet of takeout Chinese food and self-pity when my phone bust. The caller ID made me do a double take. Sophia Daniels. Now, there was a name I hadn't seen in a while, and honestly, probably the only person on planet Earth I actually wanted to talk to right now. Sophia and I went way back. College buddies who'd bonded over late-night coding sessions and a mutual hatred of pretentious computer science professors who thought they were God's gift to Silicon Valley. She was one of those rare people who could debug code and demolish your ego with equal efficiency, all while making you laugh until your sides hurt. If there was anyone who could handle the absolute dumpster fire my life had become, it was Sophia. Adrian Blake, she said the moment I picked up, you sound like hot garbage warmed over. Please tell me you're not sitting in your underwear eating cereal for dinner. Close, I admitted, looking down at my pajama pants and the container of lo mein that had become my best friend. It's Chinese food and I'm wearing pants. Barely. Jesus Christ, you really are a mess. I could practically hear her rolling her eyes through the phone. Get dressed. I'm coming over and we're going to figure this out like adults. Sophia, I don't really feel like, did I stutter? I said, get dressed. And for the love of all that's holy, please tell me you've showered in the last 24 hours. The truth was, I hadn't. But Sophia had this way of making you want to be better, even when you felt like absolute garbage. By the time she knocked on my door an hour later, I'd managed to locate a clean shirt and run a comb through my hair, which was basically the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest in my current state. She walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee from that fancy place downtown and took one look around my temporary disaster zone. Well, she said, stepping over a pile of dirty laundry. I've seen worse. Remember junior year when Tommy Morrison had that nervous breakdown during finals? His place looked like a bomb went off in a pizza factory. Thanks for the pep talk, I muttered, accepting the coffee like it was liquid salvation. Sophia plopped down on my second-hand couch, which groaned in protest and fixed me with that look she used to give our professors when they said something particularly stupid. Okay, spill it. And I want the whole story, not the sanitized version you probably told your mom. So, I told her everything. The firing, the contract, walking in on Melissa and Charles, the humiliation parade at the Green family mansion, all of it. Sophia listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her, occasionally raising an eyebrow or making those little H sounds that meant she was filing away information for later use. When I finished, she leaned back and crossed her arms, a gesture I remembered from college that usually preceded her saying something that would either change your life or destroy your self-esteem. Sometimes both. You know what your problem is, Adrian? She said, taking a sip of her coffee like she was about to deliver the wisdom of the ages. You're acting like a victim when you should be acting like a predator. What the hell is that supposed to mean? It means they've underestimated you, and that's their first mistake. Her eyes lit up with that dangerous gleam I remembered from when she'd figured out how to hack the campus vending machines. These people, Melissa, Charles, her stuck-up parents, they all think you're some pathetic loser who's going to crawl into a hole and disappear. They have no idea what you're actually capable of. Capable of what? My wife is screwing my ex-boss. Her parents think I'm pawn scum, and I'm living in a place that makes a college dorm look. What exactly am I supposed to be capable of? Sophia sat down her coffee and leaned forward, her voice getting that intensity it used to have when she was explaining a particularly elegant piece of code. You just signed a $25 million contract, idiot. You brilliant. You got resources now. You've got leverage. And most importantly, you've got me. You damn right me. Do you have any idea what I've been doing since graduation? I've been building a consulting firm that specializes in corporate espionage. The legal kind mostly. I know how to dig up dirt, follow money trails, and find the skeletons that rich people think they've buried deep enough to stay hidden. I stared at her, wondering if the stress had finally made me hallucinate. You're a corporate spy. I prefer a forensic business analyst, but yeah, basically. She grinned like a shark who just spotted a wounded seal. And trust me when I say that Charles Mercer and his merry band of backstabbers have left more breadcrumbs than Hansel and Gretel. What kind of breadcrumbs? The kind that lead to fraud charges if we're lucky. But first, we need to get you some real legal representation. Someone who knows how to play hardball with these country club. That's when she pulled out her phone and started scrolling through her contacts. I know just the guy, Victor Hale. Coldest son of A in Denver's legal scene. He's the kind of lawyer who eats rich peoples for breakfast and asks for seconds. Sophia, I can't afford some hotshot attorney. I've got the contract money, but it's not like I can just relax, drama queen. Victor's not expensive. He's an investment. And trust me, after he's done with Charles and company, they'll be paying for his services whether they want to or not. She was already dialing, and I watched in fascination as she shifted into what I could only describe as professional badass mode. Her posture straightened, her voice became crisp and authoritative, and suddenly she sounded like someone who could negotiate peace treaties or hostile takeovers with equal efficiency. Victor, it's Sophia Daniels. I've got a situation that's right up your alley. Corporate fraud, adultery, conspiracy, and a bunch of rich idiots who think they're untouchable. Yeah, it's going to be fun. She scheduled a meeting for the next day and hung up with a satisfied smile. There. Phase 1 complete. Phase 1 of what exactly? Phase 1 of making sure Charles Mercer and your cheating wife regret the day they decided to screw with Adrian Blake. She stood up and stretched, looking around my pathetic apartment one more time. You know what? This place is actually perfect. Perfect for what? Filming a documentary about rock bottom. Perfect for flying under the radar while we build your case. They think you're broken and defeated, hiding in some dump on the wrong side of town. Meanwhile, you're going to be assembling a legal strike team that'll hit them like a freight train. I felt something I hadn't experienced in days. Hope. Not the delusional everything will work out fine kind of hope, but the cold, calculated kind that comes with having a plan. A plan that involved making the people who'd betrayed me pay for every single minute of humiliation they'd put me through. "Sophia," I said, and for the first time since walking in on Melissa and Charles, I actually smiled. "I think I'm starting to like this plan." "Good," she said, heading for the door because tomorrow we start playing for keeps. "And Adrian, these people have no idea what they've unleashed." As I watched her leave, I realized that maybe rock bottom wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was just the foundation I needed to build something bigger, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous than anything Charles Mercer or the Green family could imagine. You ever get one of those invitations that's clearly designed to be a public execution disguised as a social gathering? Yeah. Well, that's exactly what landed in my mailbox 3 days after my strategy session with Sophia. Cream-colored card stock, gold-embossed lettering, the whole 9 yards of "we have more money than taste" presentation. You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of Melissa Green Blake and Charles Mercer. It read like they were announcing the merger of 2 Fortune 500 companies instead of the formalization of an affair. The date was set for Saturday night at the Green family mansion and the dress code was listed as cocktail attire. Translation: "Come watch us humiliate Adrian in public while wearing your finest threads." The smart move would have been to toss that invitation in the trash and spend the evening doing literally anything else. Reorganizing my sock drawer, watching paint dry, performing amateur dentistry on myself. But apparently, common sense had taken a vacation somewhere around the time I discovered my wife playing tonsil hockey with my ex-boss. So, there I was, Saturday night at 8 o'clock, standing in front of the Green family gates in my best suit, which, let's be honest, looked like thrift store clearance compared to what everyone else would be wearing. My Honda Civic coughed and wheezed as I pulled up to the valet station where some kid in a bow tie looked at my car like I just handed him a bag of radioactive garbage. "Will you be staying long, sir?" he asked, clearly hoping the answer was just long enough to drop something off and leave immediately. "Long enough," I said, pocketing my keys and walking toward the mansion like I owned the place. Fake confidence was my new best friend, and tonight we were going to be inseparable. The front lawn had been transformed into something that looked like a movie set for rich people having fun, the motion picture. String lights hung from every tree. Ice sculptures that probably cost more than my monthly rent dotted the landscape, and servers in crisp white uniforms circulated with champagne that I'm pretty sure cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. I walked through the front door and immediately felt like I'd stepped into the lion's den wearing a meat suit. The main foyer was packed with Denver's elite doctors, lawyers, business owners, and other assorted members of the I Wipe My Ass with $100 Bills Club. They were all laughing and chatting and pretending to care about each other's kids' college applications, but I could feel their eyes on me the moment I walked in. The whispers started almost immediately. I caught fragments of conversation as I made my way through the crowd. "Isn't that the husband? Poor bastard actually showed up. I heard he got fired. Melissa really upgraded. Yeah, real classy bunch." These people had turned gossip into an art form, and tonight I was their featured exhibition. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing server. Might as well drink their expensive booze while they talked about me, and positioned myself near the back of the room where I could watch the show without being the main attraction. The champagne tasted like liquid gold, which made sense since it probably cost about the same. That's when I spotted them. Melissa was holding court near the marble fireplace, wearing a dress that screamed, "I'm available and expensive." It was some kind of emerald green number that probably cost more than my car, and she was absolutely glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from publicly humiliating your soon-to-be ex-husband. Around her neck was a diamond necklace that caught the light every time she moved, sending little sparkles across the room like a disco ball made of pure arrogance. Charles was right beside her. Naturally, his arm wrapped around her waist like he was claiming territory. He was wearing one of those tuxedos that probably required a team of Italian tailor and a small loan to acquire. And he had that smug expression that made me want to introduce his face to my fist on a very personal level. The crowd around them was eating it up. These people loved a good scandal almost as much as they loved pretending to be morally superior to everyone else. Melissa was basking in the attention like a cat in a sunbeam, occasionally glancing around the room to make sure everyone was watching her grand performance. That's when she spotted me. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt, Melissa didn't do guilt, but maybe surprised that I'd actually had the balls to show up. She leaned over and whispered something to Charles, who turned to look at me with that same condescending smirk he'd perfected during our years working together. Melissa straightened up and clinkied her champagne glass with a butter knife, the sound cutting through the chatter like a dinner bell. The room gradually fell silent, all eyes turning toward her like she was about to announce the cure for cancer. Thank you all so much for being here tonight, she began, her voice carrying that fake sweetness she perfected during her sorority days. Charles and I are so grateful to have all of our friends and family here to celebrate this exciting new chapter in our lives. New chapter? Like our 3-year marriage had been some kind of rough draft that she'd finally gotten around to editing. I know some of you might be wondering about the timing, she continued, her eyes scanning the crowd before landing on me again. But sometimes life has a way of showing you what you really deserve. Charles has shown me what it means to be with a real partner, someone who can provide, not just financially, but emotionally and intellectually as well. The crowd murmured their approval, and I felt my jaw clench so hard I thought my teeth might crack. She was really doing this. She was actually using our engagement party to take pot shots at me in front of half of Denver's high society. To Charles, she said, raising her glass higher. My future, my partner, my real success story. The crowd erupted in applause and raised glasses. Everyone drinking to the happy couple while I stood there feeling like I'd been sucker punched in front of a live studio audience. But Melissa wasn't done yet. Charles stepped forward, his arm tightening around Melissa's waist as he raised his own glass. And to moving forward, he said, his voice carrying easily across the room, to leaving behind the people who couldn't keep up, and to building something worthy of the future we deserve. Then he looked directly at me, and his smile turned absolutely predatory. Adrian's just a man who couldn't keep up. The laughter that followed was like nails on a chalkboard. These people, these supposedly civilized, educated, refined members of society, were literally laughing at my expense while sipping champagne that cost more than most people's grocery budget. It was like being back in high school, except the bullies were designer clothes and drove cars that cost more than houses. I stood there alone, my fists clenched so tight in my pockets that I could feel my nails digging into my palms. The humiliation was complete, total, and absolutely intentional. They'd invited me here specifically for this moment, to watch me stand there helpless while they celebrated destroying my life. That's when I felt someone step up beside me, close enough that I could sense their presence without looking over. The entire room seemed to shift like the air pressure had suddenly changed. The laughter died away, replaced by a silence so complete you could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. I turned slightly and saw a figure I recognized but couldn't quite believe was really there. The crowd's reaction confirmed it. People were staring, some with their mouths literally hanging open, others frantically whispering to their companions. Charles's face had gone from smug satisfaction to absolute horror in the span of about 3 seconds. His champagne glass was trembling in his hand, and when he tried to speak, his voice came out as a strangled croak. "Oh my God." He managed to stammer, his eyes wide with something that looked suspiciously like panic. "It's him. You know that moment in movies when the cavalry shows up just when the hero's about to get massacred? Yeah. Well, apparently that actually happens in real life. And let me tell you, it's even more satisfying than Hollywood makes it look." The man standing beside me was Julian Cross. And if you don't know that name, you've either been living under a rock or you don't pay attention to the healthcare industry. This guy was basically the Steve Jobs of medical technology, except instead of making overpriced phones, he built an empire that revolutionized how hospitals manage everything from patient care to supply chains. Forbes had him on their cover last year with the headline, "The Man Who Fixed Healthcare." And seeing him in person, I could understand why. Julian was one of those people who commanded attention just by existing. He wasn't particularly tall or imposing, but he had this presence that made everyone else in the room feel like background characters in his story. His suit probably cost more than most people's cars, but he wore it like it was just another Tuesday uniform. Everything about him screamed, "I have more money than small countries and the power to back it up." But here's the thing that made the whole situation absolutely perfect. Julian Cross was supposed to be in Singapore this week, closing some mega deal that had been splashed across every business publication for the past month. The fact that he was standing in the Green family mansion at my cheating wife's engagement party was like seeing a unicorn riding a dinosaur through downtown Denver. Charles looked like he was about to have a stroke. His face had gone from its usual smug to a shade of white that matched the marble statues scattered around the mansion. The champagne glass in his hand was shaking so badly, I was surprised he hadn't dropped it yet. "Mr. Cross." Charles managed to stammer, his voice cracking like a 13-year-old boy trying to ask a girl to prom. "I didn't know you were in town." Julian turned toward Charles with the kind of smile that would make a shark jealous. "Charles," he said, his voice carrying easily across the now silent room. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." The crowd was frozen, like someone had hit the pause button on their entitled little lives. These people weren't used to being upstaged at their own parties. And having Julian freaking Cross show up unannounced was like having the president crash your backyard barbecue. Melissa, to her credit, recovered faster than her fiancé. She glided over with that practiced smile she'd perfected during her beauty pageant days, extending her hand like she was greeting royalty. Mr. Cross. What an unexpected pleasure. I'm Melissa Greenblake, soon to be Melissa Mercer. I understand, Julian said, shaking her hand with the kind of politeness that somehow managed to be insulting. Congratulations on your transition. The way he said transition made it sound like she was discussing a career change rather than abandoning her marriage. And I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. But Julian wasn't done. He turned back to me and extended his hand. And when he spoke, his voice carried across the silent room like he was addressing a corporate board meeting. Adrian, he said, shaking my hand firmly enough for everyone to see. I'm glad you're here. We have much to celebrate. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. These people had been treating me like a leper for the past hour, and now the most powerful man in healthcare was greeting me like we were old friends. The sudden shift in social dynamics was so dramatic I could practically hear their brains short-circuiting. Harold Green pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with the kind of panic that comes from realizing you might have seriously miscalculated. Mr. Cross, sir, this is such an honor. I'm Harold Green, Melissa's father. If we'd known you were coming, we would have. Would have what? Julian interrupted, his tone polite, but sharp enough to cut glass. Treated your son-in-law with more respect. The silence that followed was so complete, you could have performed surgery in it. Harold's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, while Patricia clutched her pearls so hard I was surprised the string didn't snap. Julian continued, his voice never losing the conversational tone that somehow made every word hit like a sledgehammer. You see, Adrian here isn't just a guest at this party. He's my business partner. The contract we signed last week, the one worth $25 million. That's just the beginning. $25 million. He'd said it loud enough for the entire room to hear, and the effect was immediate. The crowd started whispering frantically, the sound building like a swarm of particularly gossipy bees. These people live for this kind of drama, and Julian had just served them a 5-course meal. Charles looked like he was going to vomit. His face had gone from white to green and he was swaying slightly like someone had hit him with a baseball bat. $25 million. He managed to croak. Initial investment. Julian confirmed with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. Adrian's logistics AI will revolutionize healthcare supply chain management across North America. We're projecting a market impact in the billions. Billions with AB. The crowd was eating this up. Their attention shifting from Charles and Melissa to me like I'd suddenly become the most interesting person in the room, which, let's be honest, I had. Melissa's smile was starting to crack around the edges. She'd gone from glowing bride to beat a deer in headlights faster than her father's Bentley could go from 0 to 60. Adrienne never mentioned any contract, she said, her voice tight with forced cheer. Probably because he's modest, Julian replied. And I swear I saw him wink at me. Unlike some people, Adrian doesn't feel the need to announce his success to everyone with an earshot. The dig at Charles was so obvious, it might as well have come with neon signs, and the crowd definitely caught it. A few people were actually smirking now, the social tide turning faster than a politician's campaign promises. Patricia Green, who'd been standing frozen like a statue for the past 5 minutes, suddenly found her voice. Mr. Cross, surely there's been some mistake. Adrienne was just fired from Harrison Tech. He's living in some terrible apartment. By choice, Julian cut her off smoothly. Sometimes the most successful people prefer to fly under the radar while they're building empires. Adrian's apartment is temporary. His success, however, is permanent. That's when Charles finally found his voice again, though it came out as more of a whimper than the commanding tone he'd been using earlier. But the Harrison Tech contract we were supposed to license his technology through our partnership with, were you? Julian's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. How interesting. Because last I checked, Adrian owns that technology outright. Any licensing deals would have to go through him directly. The implications hit Charles like a freight train. His mouth fell open as he realized that not only had he lost Adrian's technology when he fired him, but now his former employee was working directly with the one company Harrison Tech had been desperately trying to partner with. In fact, Julian continued, clearly enjoying himself now. Adrian and I were just discussing the possibility of expanding our partnership. We're always looking for innovative companies to work with, though we're quite selective about our partner's character and business practices. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Julian Cross could make or break companies with a phone call, and he just basically announced that Harrison Tech was on his list. The crowd was in full whisper mode now, the sound building like a gathering storm. These people could smell blood in the water, and the sharks were starting to circle. Charles and Melissa had gone from the evening's golden couple to social pairs in the span of about 10 minutes. Julian checked his watch, probably a Rolex that cost more than most people's houses, and turned back to me. Adrian, shall we discuss those expansion plans? I believe we have an early morning meeting scheduled. Of course, I said, finding my voice for the first time since he'd arrived. Lead the way. As we walked toward the exit, Julian's voice carried back to the stunned crowd one final time. Enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone. I'm sure it will be memorable. The last thing I saw before we left was Charles standing frozen in the middle of the room, still holding his champagne glass, looking like a man who just watched his entire world collapse in real time. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, apparently nobody told Sophia Daniels that because the woman was serving it up piping hot with a side of, "Let's destroy these bastards completely." It was Monday morning, exactly 48 hours after Julian Cross had basically nuked Charles and Melissa's engagement party from orbit, and I was sitting in Victor Hale's law office, feeling like I'd been cast in some kind of legal thriller, where I was simultaneously the victim and the guy plotting the takedown. Victor's office was exactly what you'd expect from Denver's most ruthless corporate attorney. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, leather furniture that probably cost more than my Honda, and law books arranged with the kind of precision that suggested he actually read them instead of just using them for decoration. The man himself looked like he'd been designed in a laboratory specifically for intimidating opposing counsel. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, and the kind of smile that made you want to check your wallet afterward. "Adrian," he said, settling behind his massive desk like a general preparing for war. "Sophia has filled me in on the basics, but I need details. Every dirty little secret, every questionable business decision, every time Charles Mercer, so much as jaywalked, we're going to turn these people inside out." That's when Sophia pulled out her laptop and cracked her knuckles like a pianist preparing for Carnegie Hall. "Oh, Victor," she said with that predatory grin I remembered from our college days. "You're going to love this." For the next 3 hours, I watched Sophia work her magic. And let me tell you, the woman was an artist. She'd been digging into Charles and Melissa's business dealings for the past week. And what she'd uncovered was like finding out your favorite restaurant has been serving roadkill and calling it prime rib. "Let's start with the obvious stuff," Sophia said, pulling up bank statements on her screen. "Charles has been funneling Harrison Tech resources into something called Green Innovations LLC. Want to guess who the primary shareholder is?" I didn't need to guess. The sick feeling in my stomach told me everything I needed to know. "Melissa," Victor said, leaning forward with the kind of interest a shark shows when it smells blood. "Bingo. But here's where it gets really interesting." Sophia's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up incorporation documents that looked official enough to fool most people. Green Innovations was supposedly created to develop cutting-edge logistics software. Sound familiar? It sounded familiar because it was my software. The logistics AI I'd spent 3 years developing. The same technology that Julian Cross had just paid $25 million for was apparently being claimed by my soon-to-be ex-wife shell company. "Those bastards," I muttered, feeling that familiar rage building in my chest like steam in a pressure cooker. "Oh, we're just getting started," Sophia said, clearly enjoying herself. "Victor, remember when you asked about questionable business decisions? Well, Charles has been playing fast and loose with Harrison Tech's intellectual property agreements. According to these documents, any technology developed by employees using company resources technically belongs to the company. Except Adrian developed his AI on his own time, using his own equipment." Victor said, his lawyer brain already 3 steps ahead. "Exactly. But Charles filed paperwork claiming it was developed during work hours using company computers. Problem is, Adrian's got timestamped personal files going back 2 years that prove otherwise." I pulled out my phone and showed them the backup files I'd been keeping on my personal cloud storage. Every iteration, every breakthrough, every late-night coding session, all documented and dated, all clearly showing that I'd been working on this project at home on weekends during my own time. "Beautiful," Victor said, his smile getting wider. "That's fraud, conspiracy, and theft of intellectual property. But please tell me there's more." Sophia's grin could have powered half of Denver. "Oh, there's so much more. Remember how Melissa always seemed to know exactly what was happening at Harrison Tech even before I did? Well, it turns out Charles has been giving her access to confidential company information, including employee files, financial reports, and development timelines." She pulled up email chains that made my blood boil. Messages between Charles and Melissa discussing my work, my progress, my setbacks, all of it shared like I was some kind of science experiment they were monitoring. "Look at this one," Sophia said, highlighting an email from 3 months ago. Charles to Melissa. "Adrian's getting close to finishing the AI. We need to accelerate our timeline. The patent filing should be ready by next week. Patent filing. They've been planning to steal my work and patent it under Green Innovations, cutting me out completely. The betrayal was so complete, so thoroughly planned that it took my breath away. And this one, Sophia continued, pulling up another email. Melissa to Charles, he'll never bounce back from this. Once we have the technology and he's out of the picture, we can move forward without any complications. There it was in black and white. Proof that they'd been conspiring against me for months, maybe longer. This wasn't some spontaneous affair that had gotten out of hand. This was a calculated plan to destroy my life and steal my work. Victor was taking notes furiously, his pen scratching across legal pads like he was composing a symphony of litigation. This is good. This is very good, but I need more financial records, communication logs, anything that shows a pattern of deception. Way ahead of you, Sophia said, pulling up what looked like months of detailed financial records. I've been tracking their spending patterns, and Charles has been using Harrison Tech corporate credit cards for personal expenses, dinners with Melissa, hotel rooms, jewelry, including that diamond necklace she was wearing at the party. Company theft, Victor noted, adding it to his growing list. But wait, there's more, Sophia said, doing her best in commercial impression. Charles has also been falsifying expense reports, claiming business trips that were actually romantic getaways with Melissa. The Napa Valley conference that never existed, the Austin Tech Summit, that was really a spa weekend, all of it paid for by Harrison Tech shareholders. I was starting to feel dizzy from the sheer scope of their deception. How long has this been going on based on these records? At least 18 months. Probably longer. Sophia's expression softened slightly. Adrian, I'm sorry. I know this is hard to hear, but they've been planning this for a long time. 18 months. While I've been working myself into the ground, staying late at the office, missing dinners and weekends because I thought I was building something for our future. They'd been systematically planning my downfall. There's something else, Sophia said quietly. I found the original timeline for when they planned to fire you. It was supposed to happen right after the Meatfear meeting after they'd secured the licensing deal using your technology. What changed? Victor asked. Adrian beat them to it. When he signed directly with Julian Cross, it screwed up their entire plan. That's why Charles seemed so rattled at the party. He wasn't just losing Adrian's technology. He was losing months of careful planning. Victor leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers like a movie villain who just figured out the perfect scheme. Gentlemen and lady, what we have here isn't just adultery and corporate theft. This is a full-scale conspiracy involving fraud, embezzlement, and intellectual property theft. We're not just going to win this case, we're going to obliterate them. What's our next move? I asked, feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Not the naive kind that believes everything will work out fine, but the cold, calculating kind that comes with having evidence and allies. We file everything. Criminal charges, civil suits, ethics complaints with the state bar, the full nuclear option. Victor's smile was absolutely predatory. Charles Mercer and Melissa Greenblake are about to learn what happens when you steal from the wrong person. Sophia closed her laptop with a satisfying snap. They thought they were playing chess while you were playing checkers, Adrian. Turns out we were all playing poker and we just showed them our royal flush. As I walked out of Victor's office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced since walking in on Melissa and Charles' power. These people had underestimated me, treated me like a disposable pawn in their little game of greed and betrayal. Now it was time to show them exactly how wrong they'd been. You know that feeling when you're about to drop a nuclear bomb on someone's life and you're practically vibrating with anticipation? Yeah. Well, that was me on Thursday morning sitting in my crappy rental apartment watching the clock tick toward 10 a.m. like it was New Year's Eve countdown. Today was D-Day. Operation Around and Find Out was officially going live and Charles Mercer and Melissa Greenblake were about to discover that karma doesn't just come back around. Sometimes it shows up with a team of lawyers and a truckload of evidence. Victor had spent the past week crafting what he called a legal masterpiece, filing papers with the Denver District Court that read like a greatest hits collection of corporate fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy, embezzlement, theft of intellectual property, and about 12 other charges that would make a mob lawyer proud. The man had basically written Charles and Melissa's professional obituaries in legal terminology. But here's the beautiful part. They had no idea it was coming. Victor had timed everything perfectly, making sure the papers would be served at maximum humiliation potential. And trust me, when you're dealing with people whose entire existence revolves around maintaining their public image, timing is everything. My phone buzzed at exactly 10:15 a.m. Text message from Sophia. The Eagle has landed. Repeat, the Eagle has landed. Our process server, a guy named Tony, who looked like he could bench press a small car, had just delivered the lawsuit papers to Charles and Melissa at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, where they were having what the society pages had called an intimate engagement brunch with close friends and family. Intimate, right? Because nothing says intimate like inviting 24 of Denver's biggest gossip to watch you celebrate destroying someone's marriage. Sophia had done her homework as usual. She'd found out about the brunch from Melissa's Instagram story because of course Melissa was documenting every second of her fairy tale romance for social media validation. The woman had posted pictures of the fancy table settings, the mimosas that probably cost more than most people's grocery bills, and a selfie with Charles that was captioned, "Living my best life with my best man." Yeah, well, your best life was about to get a reality check served with a side of federal charges. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Victor's voice was practically purring with satisfaction. "Adrian, I have to say, 30 years of practicing law, and I've never heard screaming quite like that." Screaming? Oh, yes. Apparently, Patricia Green's reaction to seeing the lawsuit papers was audible. From the lobby, 3 floors down. I couldn't help but laugh. Patricia Green, the woman who treated volume control like a personal weakness, had finally found something worth shrieking about. That wasn't the hired help using the wrong crystal glasses. What about Charles and Melissa? According to Tony, Charles went white as a sheet and started hyperventilating. Melissa threw her mimosa at the process server, missed him completely, and hit Harold instead. The mental image of Harold Green dripping with expensive champagne and orange juice while his daughter had a public meltdown was so satisfying, I almost felt guilty about enjoying it. Almost. The best part, Victor continued, is that about half of Denver's social elite witnessed the whole thing. Tony said the place went dead silent, then erupted in whispers. "I'm betting the story's already making the rounds at every country club in the city." That was the thing about rich people. They loved drama almost as much as they loved money, especially when it involved watching someone else's carefully constructed life implode in spectacular fashion. By dinner time, every socialite in Denver would know that Charles Mercer and Melissa Greenblake were facing serious federal charges. "How long before they call?" I asked. "Oh, Charles has already tried 3 times. My secretary told him I was in court all day." Victor's laugh was pure evil genius. Let them sweat. Desperation makes people stupid and stupid people make mistakes. The next call came from Sophia an hour later. "Adrian, you need to see this. Melissa's having a complete meltdown on social media." I pulled up her Instagram account and holy, it was like watching a train derail in real time. The woman who usually posted carefully curated images of her perfect life was now firing off story after story of barely coherent rage. "This is harassment," one story read, posted over a picture of what looked like legal documents scattered across a restaurant table. "My lawyers will destroy whoever is behind this." Another story showed her crying in what appeared to be the back of an Uber, mascara streaming down her face like black tears. Some people can't handle success and will do anything to tear you down. But my personal favorite was the one where she was clearly drunk, filmed from an unflattering angle in what looked like the Green family wine cellar, slurring into her phone. "Adrian Blake is a pathetic loser who can't accept that I upgraded. Charles is twice the man he'll ever be. She's spiraling," Sophia said when I called her back. "This is beautiful. She's basically creating evidence for us in real time." "What do you mean?" "Defamation, Adrian. Every one of these posts is another charge we can add to the pile. And the drunk one that's going to play real well in front of a jury." The afternoon brought even better news. Julian Cross called personally to let me know that Harrison Tech had reached out to Metasphere trying to salvage some kind of partnership deal. "They're in full panic mode," Julian said, his voice carrying that amused tone of someone watching idiots dig their own graves. "Charles called my office 4 times today, demanding to speak with me about damage control. My assistant told him I was unavailable indefinitely." "What did they offer?" "Everything. Exclusive licensing rights, reduced rates, even offered to make Charles a consultant on the project." Julian laughed. The desperation was almost embarrassing to witness. "What did you tell them?" "I told them that Metasphere Corporation doesn't do business with companies under federal investigation." Seemed like sound business practice. That evening, Harold Green called me directly. The man who dismissed me as worthless pawn scum just days earlier was now speaking in the kind of hushed, desperate tones usually reserved for hostage negotiations. "Adrian," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Surely we can work this out like civilized people." "Civilized people," I repeated, savoring the irony. "You mean like how civilized you were when you told me I deserved what happened or when you said I wasn't good enough for your daughter? Now see here." "No, Harold. You see here, your daughter and her boyfriend committed multiple felonies. They stole my intellectual property, defrauded their employer, and conspired to destroy my career. The only misunderstanding here is that you thought I'd just roll over and take it. This will destroy Melissa's reputation. Melissa destroyed her own reputation when she decided to screw my boss in my bed. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it." I hung up on him mid-sentence, which felt almost as good as signing that $25 million contract. The final call of the day came from Charles himself. He was trying to sound confident, but I could hear the panic underneath his words like a car engine about to seize up. "Adrian, this is ridiculous. We both know this is just about your hurt feelings over Melissa. Drop the lawsuit and we can discuss a reasonable settlement." "Settlement?" I laughed so hard I almost choked. "Charles, you're facing 5 to 10 years in federal prison. What exactly do you think you have to negotiate with? You're bluffing. You don't have any real evidence. Bank records, email chains, falsified expense reports, stolen intellectual property documentation, and about 36 witnesses to your various crimes. But sure, I'm totally bluffing." The silence, on the other end, was so complete, I thought he'd hung up. "Charles, you still there, buddy? This isn't over," he finally managed, his voice cracking like a 13-year-old trying to sound tough. "You're absolutely right," I said. "It's not over. It's just getting started." As I hung up and looked around my shitty little apartment, I realized something had fundamentally changed. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the guy with the evidence, the allies, and the $25 million contract. And tomorrow, the real fun would begin. You know that moment in every courtroom drama where the music swells and justice gets served with a side of dramatic irony? Well, real life doesn't come with a soundtrack. But let me tell you, the silence in Judge Eleanor Gay's courtroom was more electric than any Hollywood score could ever be. 6 weeks after serving those beautiful lawsuit papers, we were finally here. Showtime. The Denver District Court was packed tighter than a rush-hour subway car because apparently watching rich people get their comeuppance was better entertainment than anything Netflix had to offer. The press section looked like a media convention, and I counted at least 3 cameras I recognized from the local news stations. Judge Grace was exactly what you'd want in a federal judge. Sharp as a razor, zero tolerance for and the kind of stare that could make a seasoned criminal confess to crimes they didn't even commit. She'd been on the bench for 20 years, and rumor had it she'd never met a white-collar criminal she couldn't see through like cheap plastic wrap. Charles and Melissa sat at the defendant's table looking like they dressed for their own funeral. Charles was wearing what was probably a $5,000 suit, but he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His usual smug confidence had been replaced by the kind of nervous energy you see in people who've just realized they're completely screwed. Melissa had gone for the innocent victim look, all white clothing and minimal makeup. But she kept shooting daggers at me like this was somehow my fault instead of the natural consequence of her being a lying, cheating, thieving piece of work. Their legal team looked expensive and desperate, which is never a good combination. 3 lawyers in matching suits, all trying to look confident while clearly knowing they'd drawn the legal equivalent of a busted flush. The lead attorney, some hotshot from a firm that charged more per hour than most people made in a month, kept shuffling through papers like he was looking for a miracle hidden in the paperwork. Victor, on the other hand, looked like a man who'd been waiting his entire career for this moment. He'd laid out our evidence with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Every document organized, every witness prepared, every piece of the puzzle ready to fall into place. Sophia sat behind us in the gallery, her laptop open and ready to provide technical support if needed, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Your Honor," Victor began, standing with the kind of confidence that comes from having an airtight case. "What we have before us today isn't just a simple case of corporate fraud. This is a calculated conspiracy that spans 18 months involving theft of intellectual property, embezzlement of corporate funds, and a systematic campaign to destroy my client's career and reputation." He walked toward the jury box like he was giving a TED Talk, holding up the first piece of evidence, the original contract I'd signed with Julian Cross. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at a $25 million contract for technology that the defendants attempted to steal. Not borrow, not license, not purchase, steal." The jury was eating it up. 12 regular folks who worked real jobs for real money, watching rich people try to explain why they thought they could just take whatever they wanted. The foreman, a guy who looked like he'd spent his life working with his hands, was taking notes like he was planning to write a book about it. Charles's lawyer stood up for his opening statement, and you could tell he was already fighting an uphill battle. "Your Honor, my clients are the victims of a vindictive ex-husband who can't accept that his marriage has ended. Mr. Blake is using the legal system to exact personal revenge." "Objection," Victor said calmly. "Is counsel planning to address the documented evidence of embezzlement, or are we going to pretend this is about hurt feelings?" "Sustained," Judge Graves said dryly. Counsel will stick to the facts. And boy, did we have facts. Victor presented our case like he was conducting a symphony orchestra. Each piece of evidence building on the last until the whole picture became undeniable. Bank statements showing Charles funneling company money into Melissa's shell corporation. Email chains proving they'd been planning to steal my technology for months. Expense reports that showed Charles billing Harrison Tech for romantic getaways with his mistress. The real fireworks started when Victor called Julian Cross to the stand. The man walked into that courtroom like he owned it, which given his net worth, he probably could have. His testimony was devastating in its simplicity. Mr. Cross, Victor said, in your professional opinion, what is the value of Mr. Blake's logistics AI technology? Conservative estimate? $50 million over the next 5 years. But the real value is in the potential applications. This technology could revolutionize supply chain management across multiple industries. And did Harrison Tech or any of its representatives ever contact you about licensing this technology? Julian's smile was absolutely predatory multiple times. In fact, Mr. Mercer called my office 17 times in the 2 weeks following our contract signing with Mr. Blake. He seemed quite desperate. Charles actually flinched when Julian said that. And I saw one of the jurors write something down with particular emphasis. But the real show started when Melissa took the stand. She'd clearly been coached by her lawyers to appear remorseful and sympathetic, but Melissa had never been good at hiding her true nature for very long. Victor started with softball questions, letting her tell her side of the story. She painted herself as a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, seeking comfort with a man who understood her needs. Real tragic stuff. If you ignored the part where she'd been systematically stealing my life's work. Mrs. Greenblake, Victor said, his tone shifting subtly. You testified that your relationship with Mr. Mercer began because you felt neglected by your husband. Is that correct? Yes, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Adrienne was always working, always focused on his computers. Charles made me feel valued. I see. And when did you first learn about your husband's logistics AI project? I am not sure I understand the question. Victor pulled out a printed email and handed it to her. This is an email you sent to Mr. Mercer 14 months ago. Would you mind reading the highlighted portion to the jury? Melissa's face went white as she read the email. This is taken out of context. Please read it aloud, Mrs. Greenblake. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Adrienne's AI project is progressing faster than expected. We need to accelerate our timeline for the patent filing. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Even Charles's expensive lawyers couldn't hide their grimaces. Mrs. Greenblake, Victor continued, his voice getting sharper. This email is dated 6 months before you claim your affair with Mr. Mercer began. How do you explain discussing patent filings for your husband's work before you even started your relationship with the man who would supposedly file those patents? It's not what it looks like. What it looks like, Mrs. Greenblake, is a conspiracy. What it looks like is that you and Mr. Mercer planned this entire scheme from the beginning. What it looks like is that your marriage was nothing more than industrial espionage disguised as a relationship. Melissa completely lost it. All that coaching, all that preparation, all those expensive lawyers, and she reverted to type right there in front of God, the jury, and 3 news cameras. You don't understand, she screamed, jumping up from the witness chair. Adrian was nothing. He was a nobody working in a cubicle going nowhere. Charles offered me a real future, real success. I deserved better than some loser who couldn't even afford to take me to decent restaurants. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, staring at Melissa like she'd just confessed to murder on live television. Judge Graves banged her gavel once, the sound echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot. Mrs. Greenblake, you will sit down and compose yourself or you will be held in contempt. But the damage was done. Melissa had just admitted in front of a jury and multiple cameras that she'd married me under false pretenses and conspired with Charles to steal my work because she thought I wasn't good enough for her. Victor turned to the jury with a look of satisfied vindication. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think I need to add anything to that testimony. When they played the audio recording that Sophia had somehow obtained, Melissa and Charles at some cafe, laughing about how they'd crushed me and how I'd never bounce back. I watched the jury's faces turn to stone. The defense tried to recover, but you can't unring a bell, and Melissa had just rung the Liberty Bell at full volume. Charles took the stand and tried to paint himself as a businessman making tough decisions. But after his accomplice had basically confessed to conspiracy on camera, his testimony sounded like a man trying to explain why water isn't wet. As closing arguments wrapped up, I looked around that courtroom and realized something fundamental had changed. I wasn't the broken, humiliated husband anymore. I was the guy who'd fought back, who'd refused to be a victim, who'd turned the tables on people who thought they were untouchable. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes, not even long enough to order lunch. When they came back, the foreman stood up with the kind of grim satisfaction that meant someone was about to get exactly what they deserved. In the matter of Blake versus Mercer and Green Blake, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. We find for the plaintiff on all counts. You know that moment when the universe finally decides to balance the scales and you get to watch karma deliver a beatdown so epic it should come with its own highlight reel? Yeah. Well, that was me sitting in Judge Graves' courtroom watching 47 minutes of jury deliberation turn into the most satisfying I told you so moment of my entire life. The foreman was still standing holding that verdict sheet like it contained the meaning of life itself. And the silence in the courtroom was so complete, you could have heard a pin drop in the parking lot. Charles looked like he was about to throw up. Melissa was gripping the defendant's table so hard her knuckles had gone white. And even their expensive legal team was staring at the floor like they were contemplating career changes. Judge Graves adjusted her reading glasses with the kind of deliberate precision that meant she was about to deliver some serious judicial justice. Will the defendants please rise for sentencing? Charles and Melissa stood up like they were walking to their own execution, which in a way they were. Their lawyer tried to whisper something to them, but Judge Graves shut that down with a look that could have frozen hell over. Mr. Mercer, she began, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years on the bench. You have been found guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement of corporate funds, theft of intellectual property, and breach of fiduciary duty. These are serious crimes that strike at the heart of business ethics and personal integrity. She paused, letting that sink in while Charles swayed slightly like he might pass out. You held a position of trust and responsibility, and you used that position to systematically defraud your employer and destroy an employee's career for personal gain. This court sentences you to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. 5 years. The number hit Charles like a physical blow, and I watched his knees buckle slightly. His lawyer grabbed his arm to keep him upright, but you could see the exact moment when the reality of federal prison really sank in. This wasn't some country club minimum security facility. This was real time in a real prison with real consequences. Furthermore, Judge Grace continued, you are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $250,000 to Harrison Tech for the misappropriated funds and an additional $500,000 in punitive damages to Mr. Blake. The press section erupted in whispers, and I saw at least 3 reporters frantically typing on their phones. $750,000 on top of 5 years in prison. Charles had gone from corporate executive to bankrupt felon in the span of about 30 seconds. But Judge Graves wasn't done. She turned her attention to Melissa, and if looks could kill, my soon-to-be ex-wife would have been a smoking crater in the courtroom floor. Mrs. Green Blake, she said, her voice getting colder. Your role in this conspiracy is particularly disturbing. You used the intimacy of marriage to spy on your husband, steal his intellectual property, and facilitated theft by your co-conspirator. You violated the most basic trust that exists between spouses for financial gain. Melissa was crying now, but they weren't the crocodile tears she'd been using during the trial. These were the real thing, the kind of crying that comes from watching your entire life collapse in real time. This court sentences you to 2 years in federal prison followed by 2 years of supervised probation. You are further ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $500,000 to Mr. Blake for damages related to the theft of intellectual property and emotional distress. 2 years in prison and $500,000. The woman who told me I wasn't good enough for her, who'd laughed about crushing me and how I'd never bounce back was now facing federal prison time and financial ruin. Additionally, Judge Graves continued, both defendants are permanently enjoined from any involvement in technology development or intellectual property licensing. You are barred from working in any capacity that involves proprietary information or trade secrets. That was the real kicker. Charles and Melissa weren't just going to prison. They were being permanently banned from the only industries they knew. Charles's career in tech was over, and Melissa's dreams of building some startup empire with stolen technology had just evaporated like morning mist. But the judge wasn't finished. She turned her attention to Harold and Patricia Green, who'd been sitting in the gallery looking like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Mr. and Mrs. Green, she said. Her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. While you are not criminal defendants in this case, the evidence clearly shows that you enabled and financially supported this conspiracy. You are hereby ordered to pay civil damages in the amount of $100,000 for your role in facilitating these crimes. Harold actually gasped, and Patricia looked like she might faint. $100,000 might not sound like much to people who own mansions and collected first edition books, but it was the public humiliation that really stung. Their name, their precious family reputation, was now permanently associated with federal crimes and conspiracy. The courtroom erupted as Judge Graves banged her gavel and announced that court was adjourned. Reporters swarmed toward the front of the room. Cameras flashed like strobe lights and the whole place turned into controlled chaos. I watched Charles and Melissa being led away by federal marshals, their hands cuffed behind their backs like common criminals. Charles kept looking back over his shoulder, his eyes wide with panic and disbelief. This was a man who'd probably never faced real consequences for anything in his entire privileged life. And now he was heading to federal prison. Melissa was sobbing so hard she could barely walk, leaning heavily on the marshal like her legs might give out. The woman who'd worn that diamond necklace like a trophy, who'd flaunted her affair in front of half of Denver's elite, was now wearing federal handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit in her immediate future. Victor was practically glowing with satisfaction, shaking hands with Sophia and accepting congratulations from other lawyers who'd come to watch the show. "Adrian," he said, turning to me with that predatory smile. "I've been practicing law for 30 years, and I've never seen a more complete victory. They didn't just lose, they were annihilated." The press conference afterward was surreal. Standing on the courthouse steps, facing a wall of cameras and microphones, I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality where the good guy actually wins and justice isn't just a theoretical concept. "Mr. Blake," one reporter called out, "how does it feel to see your wife and former boss sentenced to federal prison?" "Former wife?" I corrected, savoring the words. "The divorce papers were filed this morning. And honestly, it feels like justice. These people thought they could destroy my life and steal my work because they believed I was too weak to fight back. Today proved them wrong. What's next for you?" Another reporter asked. I looked up at the Denver skyline, thinking about the loft apartment. I just signed a lease for the team I was building. The future I was creating on my own terms. I'm going to do what I've always done. Innovate, create, and build something meaningful. The only difference is that now I'm doing it without people who tried to sabotage me every step of the way. That evening, I sat in my new downtown loft, looking out at the city lights and thinking about how dramatically my life had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been married to a woman who was actively conspiring against me, working for a boss who was stealing my ideas and living a lie that I was too naive to recognize. Now I was free, vindicated, and richer than I'd ever imagined possible. But more importantly, I was surrounded by people who actually gave a damn about me. Sophia, Victor, Julian, and a growing team of brilliant minds who saw potential instead of weakness. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Drinks to celebrate? I think you've earned it." As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, I realized that this wasn't just the end of my old life. It was the beginning of something infinitely better. Charles and Melissa had tried to break me. But all they'd done was forge me into something stronger. And tomorrow, the real work would begin. You know what freedom actually smells like? It smells like fresh paint, new leather office chairs, and the kind of expensive coffee that you buy because you can, not because you're trying to impress anyone. That's what hit me as I walked into my new downtown loft on a crisp Monday morning, 6 months after watching Charles and Melissa get hauled away in federal handcuffs. The place was a far cry from that shitty rental apartment where I'd eaten my weight in Chinese takeout and contemplated the ruins of my life. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Denver skyline. Hardwood floors that actually gleamed instead of peeling, and enough space to host a small army of brilliant minds who were about to help me change the world. Blake Innovations had officially launched 3 weeks ago, and we were already making waves in the tech industry that rippled all the way to Silicon Valley. Sophia was my co-founder and CTO because, let's face it, the woman could debug code and destroy enemies with equal efficiency. Victor had agreed to serve as our general counsel, mostly because he enjoyed the idea of protecting the company that had risen from the ashes of Charles Mercer's stupidity. And Julian Cross wasn't just a business partner anymore. He'd become a strategic advisor whose Rolodex opened doors I didn't even know existed. But here's the thing that really got me fired up. We weren't just building a company. We were building a middle finger to everyone who'd ever been betrayed by the people they trusted most. The Phoenix Initiative launched on a Tuesday that felt like Christmas morning, and the 4th of July rolled into one epic celebration of corporate betrayal. It was a venture fund specifically designed to help innovators who'd been screwed over by their families, employers, or business partners. We'd started with a modest $10 million fund, but after word got out about what we were doing, the applications started pouring in like water through a broken dam. There was Marcus Rodriguez, a software engineer whose brother had stolen his mobile app idea and sold it to a major tech company. Sarah Chun, a biotech researcher whose lab partner had published her work under his name and landed a 6-figure consulting deal. David Thompson, a mechanical engineer whose father-in-law had used family connections to patent his renewable energy design and cut him out completely. Each story was a variation on the same theme. Brilliant people getting screwed by the people closest to them, then being told they should just let it go and move on with their lives. Well, that noise. Moving on was for people who accepted defeat. We were in the business of fighting back. The launch event was held at the Denver Art Museum because nothing says we've arrived like hosting your corporate debut in a building that looks like it was designed by aliens with excellent taste. The guest list read like a who's who of Colorado's tech and business elite. Plus a healthy sprinkling of journalists who'd been following my story since the courtroom circus. I stood at the podium looking out at an audience of 500 people who 6 months ago would have dismissed me as a pathetic cuckold living in denial. Now they were hanging on every word, taking notes, and probably calculating how much money they could make by associating with the guy who turned personal betrayal into a multi-million-dollar empire. Ladies and gentlemen, I began my voice carrying easily through the museum's sound system. 6 months ago, I was fired from my job, betrayed by my wife, and told by her family that I wasn't good enough to breathe the same air as their precious daughter. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. These people loved a good redemption story, especially when it involved rich getting their comeuppance. Today, those same people are in federal prison, bankrupt, and permanently banned from the industries they tried to steal from me. But this isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens when you refuse to accept other people's definitions of your worth. I clicked to the first slide, showing the Phoenix Initiative logo against a backdrop of rising flames. The Phoenix Initiative exists because betrayal isn't a character flaw in the victim. It's a business opportunity for the survivor. We're not here to help people get over being screwed. We're here to help them turn that betrayal into fuel for something bigger, better, and infinitely more successful than whatever they lost. The applause was immediate and sustained. But I wasn't done yet. Our first round of funding goes to 12 innovators who've been told to sit down, shut up, and accept that life isn't fair. Instead, they're going to stand up, speak out, and build empires that make their betrayers regret ever crossing them. The energy in the room was electric. I could see people already networking, making connections, plotting their own Phoenix moments. This wasn't just a business launch. It was a movement. After the formal presentation, I found myself surrounded by a crowd of entrepreneurs, investors, and journalists who wanted to know everything about our screening process, our success metrics, and our long-term vision. But the conversation that really mattered happened near the bar, where a young woman approached me with the kind of desperate hope I recognized from my own mirror 6 months ago. "Mr. Blake," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "My name is Jennifer Walsh. My business partner stole my AI algorithm and my client list, then had me blacklisted from every tech company in Austin. I've been fighting him in court for 2 years, but he's got family money and connections." I handed her my business card. "Jennifer, send me everything. Patents, court documents, financial records, email chains, all of it. We'll have our team review your case within 48 hours. Her eyes filled with tears. "You'd really do that even though you don't know me? I know exactly who you are. I said you're someone who got betrayed by a person you trusted, and now you're being told to accept it and move on. That. You're going to fight back, and we're going to help you win." That's when Sophia appeared at my elbow, grinning like she'd just solved cold fusion. "Adrian, you need to see this." She handed me her phone, showing a news article from TechCrunch with the headline, "Blake Innovations raises $50 million in series of funding plans national expansion of Phoenix Initiative." $50 million. The number was almost abstract at this point, but what it represented was very real. The resources to help hundreds of betrayed innovators turn their pain into power. Julian Cross materialized from the crowd. Looking every inch the billionaire kingmaker in his perfectly tailored suit. "Adrian, congratulations. You've built something truly special here." "We've built something special," I corrected. "None of this happens without the team." "True," he said, raising his champagne glass. "But it took someone with your particular combination of brilliance and righteous anger to make it happen. Most people who get betrayed stay bitter. You turn bitter into better." As the evening wounded down and the last guests filtered out into the Denver night, I stood alone in the museum's main hall, surrounded by the detritus of a successful launch party. Empty champagne glasses, scattered business cards, and the lingering energy of people who just witnessed something important being born. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw the news coverage. Congrats on your success. See, Charles, even from federal prison, the bastard was still trying to worm his way back into my life." I deleted the message without responding. Some bridges weren't worth rebuilding. They were better left as charred ruins that reminded you why you burned them in the first place. I walked to the windows overlooking the city, looking out at the Denver skyline that had watched my entire transformation from betrayed husband to business mogul. Somewhere out there, Melissa was probably in her federal prison cell, wondering how the man she dismissed as a pathetic loser had ended up on magazine covers while she counted down the days until parole. But I wasn't thinking about her or Charles or any of the people who tried to break me. I was thinking about Jennifer Walsh and the dozen other innovators we were about to find. I was thinking about the 100 more applications sitting in our inbox. I was thinking about a future where betrayal wasn't the end of someone's story. It was just the beginning of their revenge arc. As I headed for the exit, I passed a mirror in the museum lobby and caught a glimpse of myself. Same face, same basic features, but everything else had changed. The man looking back at me wasn't the naive husband who trusted blindly and loved unconditionally. This was someone harder, smarter, infinitely more dangerous to his enemies, and infinitely more valuable to his allies. I am Adrian Blake. I am free. I am enough, and I will never be erased again. The elevator doors closed, carrying me toward whatever came next. And for the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely excited to find out what that would be.